Okay, I am interviewing Susan Abel. She's a teacher at Pikeland School District, but she has other experience outside of a rural school district. She also has private school experience, and she's been a core curriculum teacher teaching English, and then now she is part of the electives with teaching Spanish. So since I'm doing this for a project, Susan, for the University of School Social Work for my master's program, is it okay that I videotape our interview and write about your experiences having a student with an emotional disability in your class?
Yes, absolutely. That's fine.
Okay, so can you tell me, as far as having a student with an emotional disability in your classroom, how does it affect your classroom instruction on a daily basis?
Okay, well, the first student I'm thinking of, which was from a private school, did affect the other students' reactions in class and their reactions to her because she was so unusual in a lot of ways that they kind of held back or maybe would get impatient with her responses. So I had to think, like, how am I going to kind of almost work around her and still try to help her feel like a completely, vested member of the class, but try to keep her maybe feeling of social awkwardness at a minimum, trying to help her. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. So when you were going through, since you were doing English at that time, so did you have to kind of structure your questions in class differently and modify a lot of what you asked the class during discussions?
Yes, especially if it was open response where students could just respond with a personal response. I had to really rethink that.
Okay.
How I would question.
So it definitely changed how you had to teach certain curriculum as far as that goes. And then regarding any student with an emotional disability that you've had in your classroom, what has changed or how has it affected your classroom management style?
I'm probably more cognizant that something could maybe trigger a student's reaction or that certain students are not going to like the same music. For example, in English and in Spanish, we listen to music, so that could trigger really sometimes hostile or emotional reactions, so I have to be more cognizant about that. And about maybe, well, I would say especially verbal presentations in front of the class, which we do in Spanish and in English. That's something I'd have to sort of rework or think through. I think I try to be more sensitive now to a student that might have social anxiety especially, or any kind of emotional distress.
So how have you done your classroom routines and procedures to accommodate those students? Have you changed anything, or do you spend more time teaching those things for those students?
I'd say I've changed what I require quite a bit because, there might be a student with emotional issues may also come from a bad family background. So they may not want to talk about their family when we're learning the family unit in Spanish. So I say you can talk about your friends, you can talk about your pets, you can talk about, whatever. It doesn't have to be about family because that's a hot button issue. In English, I would say I just tried to keep it really to the text, and even though in English you can talk about feelings and emotions, try to minimize that side of it.
Yeah, I understand that because that definitely might trigger some strong reactions in a student, and then you're also with the potential of traumatizing other students, like you mentioned, with peer reactions. So describe to me a time where one of the students' behavior who's had either social anxiety or they've had some sort of anxiety or maybe temper, anger issues, how they have affected, like that you had to actually intervene and discipline the student or had to intervene in some way.
Okay. Well, one student that I had to get the administration involved. This was again at the private school, but I had to get the administration involved because she revealed something to me privately, and then I had to go to the guidance. They didn't follow up, so I went to the administration. They didn't really follow up, so actually the state authorities got involved, but they needed to be involved, so it was actually the right thing to do. And then what was the other part of that?
If they've had like an outburst or something happen as part of your classroom management, like what have you had to do to kind of smooth the situation over?
Okay. Well, one student, I'm thinking of English class again now. would just say things that didn't really make sense or even apply to what we were talking about, or she would get off on a tangent so far it was really hard to connect and bring her back. But I just tried to keep it positive, and the other students, I think, understood where she was at by that point, so they didn't really question or, mock her or anything. But again, that could have been, I don't know, I think I've just learned to, okay, thank you for sharing that, and move on.
Okay, that's
in those
good.
situations.
That sounds like a good plan, and kind of similar to what I've done. I have a few students that have that anxiety and expressive language concerns, and because of whatever mental and emotional disability, it's hard to, they want to answer questions, but they're not on the same page as the rest of the students. The way they connect to it. Text or what they're reading is way different than what the rest of the students are.
Yeah.
So, and then as far as what you have noticed, just in either the school itself with the those students, or just within your classroom, how do those students who have emotional disabilities such as anxiety, or maybe they have some sort of anger issues in your class, how do you perceive their peer interactions?
Okay. Actually, the one student I'm thinking of who I currently have in class is really intentionally distancing herself from her peers. She won't work with the partner. She won't, rarely answers when called on. So I think sometimes students sort of hurt themselves when they're already in that boat. Does that make sense? They hurt themselves with their peer interactions. Even you can sit them by the kindest student in the world who wants to help them, and they still can choose to reject that help. So the student I'm thinking of now does have an IEP, so she's following up with a special ed teacher as well. I don't exactly know if it's for social issues or for something else, although she seems very academic, so I think it's for the social issues. But I think that situation is almost like they intentionally sabotage themselves.
I could see that.
Yeah.
What do you do in those situations as far as either classroom management when the student self-sabotages, especially in group work?
This particular student I'm thinking of, I have allowed her to go to the nurse when she says she needs to go to the nurse. She has a headache every single day, go lie down. But I haven't really had a chance to push the issue because she's been suspended almost so much that I never get to follow up and say, well, this was due last time, where is it this time? Because she's been absent so much. But for suspensions or absences. But other students, I think following up one-on-one is a pretty effective way to kind of let them know your expectations. I'm trying to help you, I'm on your side. Try to make them more comfortable in the class.
Okay, that sounds good. And then your student who's had a lot of disciplinary issues, do you think some of that student's behaviors is affecting why the person's getting suspended, or is that a whole separate issue from?
Yeah, I'm not privy to exactly why she's being suspended, but I would expect so. I expect so. She can be pretty hostile towards other students, I imagine.
Okay. And then in regards to that student, how does her suspensions affect how instruction in the room, or has it at all, or do you feel like you need to make accommodations?
Yeah, I would make accommodations for her when she's there. I would be happy to give her extended time on homework. I already have, but she hasn't necessarily taken advantage of it to get that work turned in. Does that make sense?
It's difficult for you to keep up with all the missing work. It's definitely challenging.
Yeah,
you would say.
I think she even comes in with the best of intentions. I'm going to bring this back next time. I'm going to get this done next time. And for whatever all of her other things that are going on in her life, that gets pushed to the bottom of her priorities.
Oh, yeah, that would be pretty tough. And then tough on you as a teacher, because you have to manage all this paperwork, and depending on what year of school, it could affect her graduation as well.
Yeah.
And in that case, have you ever run into a student with an emotional disability that it's their senior year?
I'm thinking of a student, he didn't necessarily have emotional diagnosed problems, but he had learning disabilities and his family life was absolutely atrocious. So yeah, it did affect his graduation, and he did not graduate.
No.
Not because of just my class, but because of everything else he had going on in life.
Oh, that's really
Mhm.
hard to hear that when a student doesn't have that support to be able to graduate.
Mhm.
And then any of your students, what services have they received in the past as far as either special education or maybe outside help that you know of that you've had to know for a IEP plan?
Okay. Actually, ironically, at the private school, we really didn't have much support at all for those sorts of problems. We didn't technically even accept students with special ed needs of any kind, although there were, of course, students with issues that did need help. So we had guidance counselors, but they were more for career and college planning, so not much support at all. At the public school, we have a wonderful guidance counselor, and she will come and consult with students. We do have a social worker. I have not personally interacted with her that much in helping students. And then we have resources where students can tutor each other, do a peer tutoring. That was going pretty strong last year, and I have recommended students to pair up with peers that want to work with them and help them. But that program has sort of fallen apart this year. There were motivated students leading it last year, and now it's not happening as much.
Oh, well, that's a shame that there's not that peer resource because sometimes that could be very beneficial. And then I know you talked about who you had to get involved with a student for private school setting, but for your students with the IEP that had had like anxiety or some sort of emotional issue, who have you consulted within the school about those students?
Usually with our guidance counselor, our principal can be involved because it is such a small school, and sometimes she has a good background on family life and so on, or with my colleagues, with other teachers, especially if they are assigned to a special ed teacher for kind of their contact person.
Okay, and then as far as you being a teacher of a student of emotional disability, what do you think as far as future social workers in the field would be helpful on your end to tell us about working with those students?
Well, just the ones I'm thinking of right now don't actually, one student that I referred to does have an IEP, but the other ones don't. They don't actually have much of any supports, I would say. If you talk to the guidance counselor, she could say, yeah, please take, student X aside and just help him work through some stuff, but you wouldn't know that coming into the school. So I feel like you need either to get to know but you can't get to know the whole student body maybe in the time that you're allowed, so maybe make connections with guidance counselors or especially special ed teachers that could say this student might need some extra support.
Okay, well, thank you for letting me interview you.
You're welcome.